The old fisherman hauled the net slowly, his muscles straining against the weight. He expected the usual: silver flashes, the smell of river water, the slap of tails. But what he heard was not the sound of fish. It was crying, thin, fragile, almost human. His hands froze on the rope. The sound pierced through the early morning silence. No gulls, no wind, only that strange, broken sob. Heart pounding, he dragged the net closer. The fish twisted, gasping, but his eyes locked on something else, something small, tangled in nylon threads. A bundle, dark, motionless. Then another cry. His breath caught. His fingers trembled as he reached into the wet knot of rope and scales. The thing squirmed weakly, slippery with river water, fighting for air. What are you?" he whispered, voice shaking. The fisherman lifted it slowly from the net, droplets falling back into the river. The fish stilled, as if watching. His eyes widened at what lay cradled in his hands. And then everything stopped. What he saw was not what any fisherman should ever find. What would you do if you were the one pulling that net from the water? Don't forget to subscribe, because what comes next will shock you. The fisherman stood at the river's edge, cradling the dripping bundle in his rough hands. His breath came shallow, his heart thudding harder than when he rowed against the current. It wasn't a child. It wasn't human at all. The small face blinked through mud and water, a narrow snout trembling, eyes barely open. A fox pup, no bigger than a kitten, fragile bones trembling beneath wet fur. Its tiny chest fluttered in uneven beats, each rise and fall weaker than the last. The net had bitten into its body. Nylon threads cut across its side and neck. He saw patches of fur missing where it struggled, its tiny claws worn down against the rope. A whimper slipped out, high and pitiful, like glass breaking in the quiet morning. The fisherman's hands shook. He almost dropped it back into the net. He had never been a man of hesitation, not on the water. Fish were fish. Life and death happened quickly, without thought. But this was different. He crouched, setting the pup gently on the grass. It shivered, legs twitching, ribs quivering as if they might break. He pressed his palm against its chest. A faint heartbeat. Weak, fragile, still there. The fisherman drew in a ragged breath. Should he leave it? Nature was cruel. He knew. Foxes were wild. Maybe this one had been abandoned. Maybe it was already doomed. Returning it to the river would be the quick choice. No burden, no risk. But as he stared at the pup, he saw the way its eyes rolled back, searching, desperate. It was fighting, clinging to life with what little strength remained. And suddenly, his chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. He thought his youngest son, how the boy had once been sick, coughing through long nights. So small he seemed like he might disappear. He remembered holding him, listening for every breath, terrified the next one wouldn't come. The pup whimpered again. A sound so thin, so human, it cut through every wall he had built around himself. The fisherman cursed under his breath. His hands moved without thought. He pulled a knife from his belt and slid it beneath the nylon threads. Slowly, carefully, the fibers snapped one by one, releasing the small body from its prison. The pup twitched, as though each cut brought a surge of pain. When the last thread gave way, the fisherman lifted it again. Its fur clung in wet clumps. Its sides rose unevenly, breath rattling in its throat. He could feel its heart now, fluttering like a trapped bird against his calloused palm. He pressed it close to his chest, trying to give it warmth. But doubt gnawed at him. What would he do with it? Bring a wild fox into his home? His wife would never agree. The neighbors would call him foolish. And if the pup carried disease, he could risk his family's safety for a creature that might die before nightfall. Still, he couldn't place it back into the river. Not now. Not after holding it like this. The fisherman looked around the empty riverbank, as if waiting for someone to tell him what to do. But there was no one, only the silent water, the circling gulls, the morning sun creeping higher behind the hills. He carried the pup to his boat, laid it gently on a rag used for drying nets. The animal stirred weakly, eyes slitting open, before falling still again. The fisherman sat, staring at it. His hands fidgeted, reaching for the oars, pulling them back, hesitating. His catch still flopped in the net, forgotten. For the first time in years, the fish didn't matter. What mattered was the weight of the tiny body at his feet. Minutes passed. The river lapped at the boat. The fisherman leaned forward, pressing a finger against the pup's side again. Still alive, barely. His jaw tightened. He pushed the oars into the water. The boat glided toward shore, every stroke heavy with doubt and fear. He couldn't explain why, but he knew he was no longer fishing that morning. He was carrying something else. Something he hadn't chosen but couldn't let go of. The fox pup belonged to the wild, to the woods, to the cruel hands of nature. And yet its life now rested in his. By the time he reached the dock, his mind was set. His family would see it. They would protest. They would call him stubborn, reckless, soft. But he would not let it die in the river. Not like this. He lifted the rag, wrapping the pup carefully. Its head rested limply against his chest, whiskers twitching once before falling still again. He walked slowly, every step carrying the weight of the decision he had made. Each breath from the pup was a countdown. He felt it, heard it, knew the clock was running out. And as he reached the door of his small house, his hands trembled once more. Would he be too late? Would it survive the night? Or had he only carried death home with him? The fisherman pressed his palm against the latch, heart pounding louder than the river behind him. Inside, his wife's voice called out, "What took you so long?" He looked down at the rag in his arms. The small bundle shuddered once, almost imperceptible, and then it went still. Would you have tried to save the fox, or let nature decide? Subscribe now to see what happens when this family discovers what he carried through their door. The fisherman pushed the door open with his shoulder, clutching the bundle to his chest. His wife turned from the stove, frowning at the dripping rag in his arms. "What's that?" Her voice carried more suspicion than curiosity. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped closer. He lowered the rag carefully, revealing the limp body of the fox pup, its fur matted with river water, its ribs rising in weak, uneven jerks. A broken sound escaped its throat, halfway between a whimper and a cough. His wife recoiled. "A fox? In my kitchen? Are you mad?" He didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the pup. He laid it gently on the wooden table, pushing aside a bowl of potatoes. The children had heard their mother's tone and came running. Two pairs of eyes, wide and bright, hovered by the doorway. "What is it, Papa?" the younger boy whispered. The fisherman knelt, peeling back the rag. "It was in my net," he said softly. "Still alive." His wife shook her head, stepping back. "Alive for now. You should have left it. It's wild, dangerous." The pup shivered, its body convulsing. A wet cough rattled in its chest. The fisherman leaned close, listening. Breath came shallow, each one weaker than the last. "No," he said, almost to himself. "Not yet." He reached for a small towel from the shelf, one they use to dry dishes. He pressed it gently against the pup's fur, trying to draw out the water. His hands were clumsy, too rough, and the pup whimpered, making the children flinch. "Papa, is it dying?" the older one asked. "Quiet," he muttered, though his voice shook. He turned to his wife. "Boil water. Cloths. Anything clean." She hesitated, lips pressed thin. She wanted to argue. He knew. She wanted to throw the animal back outside. But she saw his face, the same look she had seen once before, years ago, when he held her sick child in the dead of night. She sighed and turned the stove. The room filled with heat, with the sharp hiss of boiling water. The fisherman worked silently, drying the pup as best he could. He cut away bits of nylon still tangled in its fur. He checked its mouth, clearing river silt from its tongue. The creature stirred weakly, then fell still again. He bent close, listening. Breath, barely. The children crept nearer, whispering, "Will it live?" "Sure." The minutes stretched like hours. Every sound from the pup pulled at them. A cough, a twitch, the shallow rise of its chest. Each sign was hope. Each pause was terror. The fisherman lifted it again, pressing it against his shirt. His warmth, his heartbeat, steady and strong, against a frantic flutter of its own. He rubbed its side with his palm, tried to coax life back into the small body. His wife returned with a basin of warm water and cloths. She set them down with a huff. "You're mad," she muttered. "But if you're going to do this, at least do it properly." She handed him a cloth, damp and warm. Together, they worked in silence. She held the pup steady while he cleaned mud from its fur. She wrung the cloth, wiped again, careful now, softer. The fisherman glanced at her. She avoided his eyes. The children crouched on the floor, watching every move. Their whispers floated through the room. "It's so small." Smaller than the cat. Why was it in the river? The fisherman didn't answer. He didn't know. And the question gnawed at him. Hours passed. The morning light shifted, filling the room with a softer glow. The pup stirred once, lifting its head weakly before collapsing back onto the towel. The fisherman's breath caught. He leaned closer. Its eyes open, cloudy, unfocused. For a moment, it looked at him, straight at him. And in that frail gaze, he felt the weight of something he couldn't name. Then the eyes closed again. The room fell silent. The children held their breath. His wife's hand stilled. The fisherman pressed his fingers against the pup's chest, waiting. "There, faint. Still there. Breathe," he whispered. "Just breathe." The fire crackled. The clock ticked. The world shrank to the rise and fall of the pup's ribs. Time dragged on. He fed it drops of water from a spoon. Most spilled down its chin, but some reached its tongue. He stroked its back, rubbed its paws. He felt ridiculous, an old fisherman, wasting hours on a dying fox. But he couldn't stop, not when it fought so hard for each breath. His wife busied herself with chores, but her eyes kept flicking back to the table. The children drifted in and out, sometimes whispering prayers, sometimes staring in solemn silence. Afternoon passed into evening. The pup's breaths grew steadier, though still shallow. Its chest no longer collapsed with each gasp. It twitched, stretching one leg weakly, as though testing the world again. The fisherman exhaled for the first time in hours. His shoulders sagged. He stroked its fur, whispering, "Good. That's good." But he knew this was only the beginning. The pup was alive for now. Tomorrow might bring something else. Fever, weakness, death. As the last light faded from the windows, the fisherman sat beside the table, refusing to move. His wife placed a bowl of stew in front of him. He didn't touch it. He kept his eyes on the fragile creature, listening, always listening. The children curled on the floor, whispering until they drifted to sleep. The house grew quiet. Only the pup's shallow breaths filled the silence. The fisherman leaned close, his face inches from its tiny body. His whisper was rough, almost a prayer. "Don't give up. Not tonight." He stayed that way long into the dark, afraid that if he closed his eyes, the sound of its breathing might vanish forever. Would you have risked bringing this wild creature into your home? Subscribe to see what happens when the entire town learns what the fisherman has done. By morning, the whispers had begun. The fisherman hadn't told anyone. He hadn't planned to. But in a small village, secrets were like smoke. They drifted through cracks, curling into every corner, impossible to contain. The baker's wife saw his children carrying scraps of food into the house. The grocer noticed him buying milk, though he'd never drunk it himself. And soon, the story spread like wildfire. The fisherman had brought a fox into his home. At the well, women clutched their buckets and shook their heads. "Wild animals don't belong under a roof." One said, "It'll bite the children. Mark my words." By the river, men laughed. Cares more for a fox than for his nets. No wonder his catch is smaller these days. Even the pastor muttered after service, "Mercy is for people, not beasts." The fisherman heard it all, every murmur, every sideways glance. His wife bore the brunt of it too, neighbors lingering too long at the fence, asking pointed questions. She told him one night, her voice sharp, "They think you've gone soft. They think you've lost your sense." He didn't argue. He only looked at the bundle on the blanket near the fire. The fox pup stirred, eyes half open now, blinking at the light. Its fur was still patchy, its breast shallow, but each day it clung tighter to life. The fisherman knelt, dipping a spoon into a small bowl of warm milk. He held it near the pup's mouth. At first, nothing. Then a twitch, a tongue darting, hesitant. Drops spilled down its chin. The fisherman caught them with a cloth. He tried again. This time, the pup swallowed. The children gasped softly, clapping their hands to their mouths. "It ate," the younger whispered. The fisherman's chest loosened. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. He stroked the pup's back, rough hand gentle now. "Good," he murmured. "That's good." Day by day, the fox grew. Slowly, painfully slow. It tried to stand, legs trembling, then collapsed. It tried again and again. The children watched in silence, as though witnessing a miracle unfold in their own home. On the third day, it managed to stay upright, wobbling before dropping to its side. The boy laughed with delight. His sister clapped her hands. The wife, despite herself, smiled faintly before turning away. But the town didn't smile. At the market, women pointed. "A fox carries disease," they hissed. "What if it spreads?" At the tavern, men jeered. "He'll wake one morning and find his chickens gone. Mark me. Foxes can't be tamed." The fisherman walked with his head low, ignoring them, yet each word cut deep. He had never cared for their gossip before, but now it weighed on him heavy as stone. That night, he sat by the fire, staring at the pup curled beside him. Its small body rose and fell in quiet sleep. He wondered if the others were right. Was he foolish? Reckless? Endangering his family for an animal that belonged to the wild? But then the pup stirred, opening its eyes, golden, soft, uncertain. It looked at him, not past him, not through him, but at him. And in that gaze, the fisherman felt something stir. Trust. Fragile, tentative, but real. He reached out slowly, letting it sniff his fingers. The fox pressed its nose against his hand, then rested its head on his palm. The fisherman closed his eyes. For a moment, the jeers of the town vanished. There was only the soft weight of life against his hand. The days blurred into weeks. The pup learned to lap milk from a shallow bowl. It took its first shaky steps across the wooden floor. It flinched at sudden noises, the scrape of a chair, the slam of a door, but no longer hid from the children. Sometimes it even followed them, ears twitching, paws tapping softly against the floor. The wife complained less. She still frowned at the fox, still muttered about fleas and disease, but her hands lingered longer when she set down scraps of meat. One evening, the fisherman caught her kneeling near the pup, stroking its head when she thought no one watched. Outside, the whispers only grew. "They're mad," one neighbor said. "They're cursed," said another. The fisherman bore it all in silence. He felt torn, ashamed when he walked to the village, yet fierce when he returned home to the small, growing creature that now wagged its tail when it saw him. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he sat on the porch with the fox at his feet. Its fur had thickened, soft red now instead of patchy gray. It raised its head, nose twitching at the air. For the first time, it barked, a sharp, sudden sound. The children squealed with delight. The fisherman smiled faintly, pride swelling in his chest. In that moment, he knew, ridicule or not, he had made the right choice. But deep down, a shadow lingered. He knew the town would not forgive easily, and he knew the fox's battle was not over. That night, as the fox curled at his feet by the fire, he whispered, "You're stronger now, but the world is not kind. We'll see if you're ready for it." The pup twitched as though in answer. The fisherman closed his eyes, the voices of the town echoing faintly in his ears. Dangerous, foolish, cursed, but louder still was the sound of the fox breathing, steady now, alive. And that was enough. For now, would you have stood against the whole town for the sake of a helpless creature? Subscribe, because the danger isn't over yet, and what happens next will test the fisherman's choice more than gossip ever could. The storm came without warning. Winds howled through the village, rattling shutters, bending trees. Rain struck the roof like fists. The fisherman sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, when he heard it. the sound that froze his blood. A sharp cry, then silence. He dropped the knife, turned. The fox pup lay stretched on the floor, legs stiff, sides heaving. Its chest rose once, twice, then faltered. "No!" he whispered, leaping to its side. He pressed a hand against its ribs. The heartbeat fluttered, weak and uneven. The breath rattled, shallow, fading. His wife rushed from the kitchen, hands to her mouth. The children followed, their eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong with it?" the boy cried. The fisherman didn't answer. His throat was tight. He lifted the fox into his lap, its head lolled against his chest, whiskers twitching once before going still. Outside, thunder cracked. The house trembled. The boy shouted over the noise, "We need a doctor." The fisherman shook his head. "No one will come in this weather. Roads are flooded. We're on our own." The wife's eyes filled with tears. "Then it's going to die." The fisherman looked down at the fragile body in his arms. He refused to accept it. Not tonight. He laid the pup on the blanket near the fire, kneeling beside it. His hands shook as he stroked its chest, willing it to breathe, but the breaths came slower, weaker. Memories stirred. Long ago, his grandmother's voice telling him of remedies used when no doctor could be found. Strange mixtures. Simple things pulled from the earth and cupboard. He had scoffed then. But now, in the roar of the storm, those words returned like a lifeline. He stood abruptly. Garlic. Honey. Milk. Bring them. His wife stared at him. What goodwill. Do it. His voice cracked like the thunder outside. She obeyed. The children scrambled, pulling jars and pots from shelves, clattering them onto the table. The fisherman crushed garlic with the flat of his knife, mixing it with a spoonful of honey, thinning it with warm milk. His hands moved fast, desperate, clumsy. He dipped a cloth in the mixture, wrung it gently, then pressed drops into the fox's mouth. At first, nothing. The liquid slid from the sides of its tongue. He tried again, rubbing its throat lightly to coax a swallow. The pup coughed weakly. A tiny sound, fragile as glass. "That's it," the fisherman whispered. "Take it. Breathe." The family huddled close, the storm raging around them. Time slowed. Every heartbeat of the fox felt like borrowed time. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. The children dozed against their mother's lap, jerking awake each time the fox whimpered. The fisherman never moved. He fed the creature drop by drop, whispered encouragements, rubbed warmth into its paws. Once, the fox stiffened suddenly, as if gripped by unseen hands. Its body arched, then collapsed, limp. The wife sobbed, clutching her apron, but the fisherman pressed his ear to its chest. "Faint. Still there. Stay with me," he murmured. "Fight. Just fight." The storm hammered on. The house creaked. Shadows stretched across the walls. In that endless night, the fisherman felt himself break open. He realized how much the creature meant, not just to him, but to them all. It had turned their kitchen into a place of wonder, had taught his children to whisper prayers at its side, had softened even his wife's stern hands. It was more than a fox now. It was family. He would not lose it. Near dawn, the storm began to fade. The rain slowed. The thunder rolled away into the hills. The fisherman's eyes burned from sleeplessness. His hands were numb from holding the fox, keeping it close to the fire, feeding it what little mixture remained. And then he felt it, a stronger beat beneath his palm, the rise and fall of its chest. Steadier now, a twitch of its paw, a soft whimper, not of pain but of protest, as though annoyed by the taste of the mixture. The fisherman's breath caught. He looked at his wife. Her eyes widened. "It's stronger," she whispered. The children leaned in, rubbing their sleepy eyes. The fox shifted, blinking weakly at them. Its gaze was cloudy but alive. The fisherman closed his eyes, shoulders sagging with relief. He stroked the creature's head. "Good. You're still here." The family gathered close, silent in their awe. They had fought through the storm together, and the fox, against every odd, had chosen to stay. As dawn light spilled through cracks in the shutters, the fisherman whispered a promise he had never spoken aloud before. "You're ours now. Whatever they say out there, whatever storm comes, this is your home." The fox's ear twitched as though understood. The fisherman leaned back, exhaustion flooding him. His hands finally stilled. Outside, the village would soon wake, and whispers would start again. But in this quiet moment, with the fox breathing steady beside him, none of that mattered. The storm had come to break them. Instead, it had bound them tighter. And the fisherman knew this was not the end of their trials. It was only the beginning. Would you have stayed awake through the night, fighting for a life everyone else said was hopeless? Morning broke, clear after the storm. The fisherman woke where he had fallen asleep, slumped against the hearth, his hand still resting on the small body beside him. For a moment, he feared it had been a dream, that when he looked down, he would find only stillness. But the fox pup stirred. It stretched, tiny paws pushing against the blanket, nose twitching toward the smell of smoke and ash. Its eyes blinked open, brighter than the day before. Alive. The fisherman let out a breath that seemed to come from his very soul. He rubbed his face with both hands, rough palms hiding the tears that slipped free. From that day, the pup did not fade. It grew, slowly at first. Tentative steps across the wooden floor, awkward tumbles into corners. The children laughed and coaxed it, leaving trails of crumbs for it to follow. The wife, though still muttering about fleas, began placing scraps by the bowl without being asked. Weeks passed. The pup's fur thickened into a warm red coat. Its legs grew strong. Its golden eyes no longer wandered aimlessly but fixed, always on the fisherman. Wherever he went, it followed, to the garden, to the shed, even to the river's edge, where it would sit patiently, watching him cast his nets. The villagers still whispered. At first, madness, they said, a fox cannot be tamed. But whispers turned to silence when they saw the animal trotting at his heel like a loyal hound, when they saw it wait for him at the market's edge, ears twitching, gaze steady, when they saw the children run their hands through its fur without fear. One afternoon, the butcher's wife stood with her arms crossed, watching the fox curl at the fisherman's feet while he repaired a net. She muttered to a neighbor, "Perhaps he knew something we didn't." Bit by bit, suspicion softened into curiosity, curiosity into respect. The fisherman never boasted, never defended himself. He only cared for the fox in silence, as though the world's judgment mattered less than the fragile life that had once lain half drowned in his net. And the fox thrived. It learned to leap across the yard, swift and graceful. It dug at the earth with joyful mischief, then ran to the fisherman when scolded. At night it curled by the hearth, head resting on its paws, eyes always open until the fisherman himself closed his. The bond was wordless, yet unbreakable. Sometimes, late in the evening, the fisherman would sit with the fox in his lap, stroking its coat. He would remember the night of the storm, the shallow breaths, the hours spent whispering into the dark. He would feel the weight of what might have been lost, and he would whisper softly, almost to himself, "Thank you for staying." Seasons turned. The river swelled with spring rains, then shrank under summer's heat. Leaves burned gold in autumn, then fell away. Through it all, the fox grew sleek, strong, unshakable in its devotion. The villagers began to greet the fisherman differently, no longer with laughter or pity, but with nods of quiet acknowledgment. Some even asked about the fox, marveling at its gentleness. A few brought gifts, bones, scraps of meat, offered shyly to the animal that had once been called a curse. The fisherman accepted nothing. He needed no one's approval. But deep inside, he felt a shift. The same people who once mocked him now stood in awe of the bond they had witnessed with their own eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the river in fire, the fisherman walked to the bank with the fox at his side. The air was still, the water calm. He lowered himself onto the grass, the same place where months ago he had pulled a half-dead creature from his net. The fox laid down beside him, curling at his feet, its eyes lifted to his face, searching, steady. The fisherman placed a hand on its head. He said nothing for a long time. There was no need. The silence between them was full. At last he whispered, voice rough but tender, "You came from this river, and now you stay with me. For that I thank you." The fox blinked slowly, as if an answer. Its ears twitched at the sound of the water. Then it rested its head against his boot, content. The fisherman looked out across the rippling surface, his heart heavy with gratitude too large for words. He thought of the storm, the whispers, the long nights spent fearing the end. He thought of the laughter of his children, the quiet acceptance of his wife, the shifting eyes of the village. And he thought of the small, broken cry that had first stopped his hands on the rope. The river moved on, steady and eternal. The man and the fox sat together, bound by something deeper than words, something forged in silence, in struggle, in the simple act of refusing to let go. The final image, the fisherman and the fox side by side, watching the water in the dying light, their silhouettes still against the horizon. Man and beast, family, forever. Would you have risked your standing in the community for the sake of one fragile life? Subscribe, because stories like this remind us sometimes the smallest cry can change everything.